Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 11th session in our webinar series with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. WaterSense and AWE started the series in 2015. The goal was to reach the different audiences that have a role in ensuring outdoor water efficiency, including landscape professionals, local governments, and water utilities. We have had 10 successful webinars to date, many of which highlighted how local governments and the outdoor industry are working together to reach customers. All of our webinars have been recorded and are available for on-demand viewing for people who are busy during the day when we hold the live sessions. Before we get started, let's cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees were muted when they entered the webinar to minimize background noise. To ask questions, you can type those into the chat box at the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. This presentation will be available on the WaterSense website and AWE's YouTube channel following the presentation. But before we continue, we have a few poll questions for you. We'd like to know who we have on the call today. Are you a local government, state government, irrigation professional, a water utility, a university or a university extension service, or other? Great, it looks like we have a lot of local and state governments on the line, lots of water utilities and irrigation professionals, and then a few universities or extension programs and some others. Our next poll question is, what part of the country are you calling in from? You're in the West, Southwest, Midwest, Southeast, or Northeast? Okay, it looks like we have a lot of people calling in from the West, and then several others from other parts of the country. Great, and as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is called Using Mobile Technology to Communicate with Water Customers. Our featured speakers today are Julius Duncan, Outdoor Coordinator for WaterSense. Julius is the Environmental Engineer for the WaterSense Outdoor Program. He has a master's degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Georgia and a bachelor's degree from Florida A&M University. Marianne Dickinson is the president and CEO of AWE and the executive director of the California Water Efficiency Partnership. She has over 40 years of experience, having worked at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the Southern Central Connecticut Regional Water Authority, and the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. She's a graduate of the University of Connecticut with a degree in environmental planning. Marianne has authored numerous publications on water conservation, land use planning, and natural resource management, and has co-produced 2 films which have aired on public television and community cable stations. Charles Swanson, the Extension Program Specialist for the Landscape Irrigation Program with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, is a state of Texas licensed landscape irrigator and conducts statewide trainings and short courses for irrigation professionals, municipal employees, and state agency personnel in landscape irrigation and water conservation throughout the Texas A&M School of Irrigation. He currently manages the daily operations of the Texas Evapotranspiration, or Texas ET network, and Water My Yard program, and coordinates various testing and evaluation programs for landscape irrigation products, such as drip irrigation, sprinklers, soil moisture sensors, and smart controllers. Charles has a Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Agriculture in Agricultural Systems Management from Texas A&M University in College Station. But before we hear from Julius and Charles, Marianne will give an update about AWE. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you very much. So we just want to spend a few minutes and talk about the Alliance for Water Efficiency and what kinds of resources we have on the outdoor irrigation issue. Next slide, please. So the first, just a word or two about the Alliance. If you aren't familiar with us, we are very proud of the fact that we view us as a voice for water efficiency in the United States and Canada. We're really the premier North American organization for the past 10 years with this as our sole mission to promote the efficient, sustainable use of water. We are stakeholder driven. We serve not only water suppliers, but we also work with plumbing, appliance, and irrigation manufacturers, advocates for water efficiency, government agencies, academia, and they are very involved with us in the development of our programs and our offerings to the membership. We strive to be very collaborative in the way we do our policy advocacy, both on the federal and state levels, our education programs, working cooperatively with our members, and developing tools and research that highlight needs that our members have in terms of needing more information on, especially on outdoor water use patterns and savings. So this is an area that we are especially interested in. So if you haven't heard about us before, you can email us at the membership at a4we.org, and we'd be happy to provide you some information on how you can be part of this network. Next slide, please. So just a very simple slide showing what our vision is. We are not just a one-trick pony with respect to water conservation. We want to link it to various other programs that exist in the whole broad world of water resources management. We want to specialize in getting communities to be resilient in their water use and water resource portfolio options. We want our utilities to be sustainable. We want our efficient products manufacturers to thrive. We want our consumers to be smart. All of these that you see in this graphic are issues that we are very interested in, are concerned about, and have programs that we develop on all of these issues. So, for example, if rates are a problem for you, if the declining sales from water efficiency gains seem to be plaguing your finance department, visit us at our Financing Sustainable Water website. These are all resources that are available to you, especially that site is available free of charge. Next slide. But we do want to focus on our outdoor water resources for this call, so visit our regular website, a4we.org. We have a resource library. You see the green tab in the navigation bar. This is Resource Library. And there's a whole suite of pages that deal with landscape, irrigation, and outdoor water use. Each one of those items is a detailed set of pages that morph out into a lot of information, publications posted, research available. Next slide. Next slide, please. So speaking of research, this is what I wanted to basically finish the AWE update with. We are undertaking a fairly extensive research initiative on the outdoor sector with the goal of giving information, actionable information to our water supplier members on what the savings potential would be and actual water savings are from outdoor water conservation programs. And so we've been doing this in two phases. The first phase was a review, analysis, and evaluation, synthesis of published and pending research on outdoor water use. That's the report that you see at the top, Outdoor Water Savings Research Initiative. And it recommends areas where research is lacking, where research needs to be undertaken. This was a report that was done about a year ago. It's posted on our website. And it led us into a phase 2 of this project where we actually wanted to undertake some of those missing research areas and develop some new empirical research that would provide relevant information for water suppliers in particular, information that would be statistically validated, peer-reviewed, and information that they can use in designing their programs with defined savings expectations. Next slide. So as part of those at phase 2, we have 2 studies that I just wanted to mention. We have a landscape transformation study that's underway, and it's all about reducing the requirement for turf. What are the reasons, rationale, and water savings associated with transforming the landscape from just one type of plant material to a broader range of plant materials. What are the options for doing that? What are the consumer behaviors associated with that? What is their interest in changing out their landscape? And so we have 13 water providers that are participating in that study, which is exploring the reasons and demand reductions associated with the removal of certain sections of turf and transforming the landscape. We do expect the report to be finished in late 2008, and a public summary will be available as an executive summary of that study's information. Next slide. The second study we're doing is one on drought restrictions, and it is examining the use and effectiveness of municipal irrigation restrictions during drought. And we have 10 Western utility participants in that study. We'll be constructing drought timelines, evaluating the changes in demand that have occurred from the restrictions, and exploring the impact of varying levels of restrictions and drought response and how predictable and stable they have been over time. Is there pushback and rollback into prior consumption methods, or are the behavioral changes that result from the restrictions, do they have some permanency? This is what we'll be evaluating. Again, that report is expected in late 2018, and we will have an executive summary that will be publicly posted. Next slide. But in the introduction, you heard that I'm also the executive director of the California Water Efficiency Partnership, which is a chapter of the Alliance for Water Efficiency. It's the California organization that is now launching to replace the older California Urban Water Conservation Council. And they have a very extensive landscape program that I wanted to mention here on the webinar that consists of professional tools and training, and it gives information to water suppliers to help them get started. How do they design a cost-effective outdoor conservation program? How do they optimize returns? How do they get, maximize the benefits from a watershed approach to sustainable landscaping? What are some of the criteria that help with landscape conversion? So there's a tool that helps them analyze that. There's a return on investment calculator that's available to help optimize those returns. And then the last step is effective marketing of the landscape programs, using community-based social marketing resources to basically integrate the community-based social marketing into landscape program planning and implementation. And we are planning webinars on this for 2018. So if you're interested in that, I will give you an email address in a moment that you can email for more information. And then lastly, landscape programs in a peer-to-peer learning format where those water suppliers who have been very successful in their programs are helping to mentor and teach on a peer basis those that have yet to start. So this is a whole landscape suite of programs that the California Water Efficiency Partnership has undertaken and will be maintaining and expanding in the future. Next slide. And so I think this is my last slide. This actually, again, gives you the contact information for Lisa Cuellar, who was the Landscape Program Manager at the California Water Efficiency Partnership. You have her email there. So if you're interested in more information about the tools and training for sustainable landscaping that are being developed in California, give Lisa an email. I think those program offerings will, of course, be shared across the national platform very shortly, but I wanted to give a shout out to all the work that she's been doing in California. So I think that's all I've got for an update. Thank you very much for giving me this little spot to talk about our work.
All right, thanks, Marianne, and thanks to everyone who has joined us today to learn more about WaterSense and water-saving opportunities. WaterSense was launched by EPA in 2006 to promote water efficiency and encourage innovation in manufacturing. We help organizations and consumers save water for future generations. The WaterSense label, which is displayed here, provides a simple way for consumers and businesses to identify water-efficient products, homes, and programs. The label helps consumers and businesses identify products that have been independently certified for water efficiency and performance. The label is reserved for products that reduce water use by at least 20% and perform as well or better than standard models. The amount of water needed for facility types and usages vary widely. Each of these require a minimum amount of water to function and maintain their usefulness. As many of you have probably experienced, water used for irrigation can be significant and can be one of the major culprits for water use. For example, commercial facilities commonly have in-ground irrigation systems used to maintain fields, pools, or other features. Climate can affect the amount of additional water needed to irrigate the landscape. If rainfall is sufficient, irrigation can be decreased. But if evapotranspiration is high, then irrigation will need to increase. The design and size of a landscape dictate the amount of water needed. Minimizing the size of the landscape needing irrigation can help keep water use under control. When designing a landscape, consider these water-efficient practices. Soil is the foundation of the landscape. Healthy soils help develop deep plant root systems and allow water to properly infiltrate. Maintain good topsoil that captures rain as it falls and releases water back to plants over time. Appropriately graded sites with gentle slopes allow water to stay where it is applied instead of running off. Finally, your landscape should be designed by grouping plants according to their water needs to promote efficient irrigation in those zones that do require supplemental water. Experts estimate that up to 50% of water used for irrigation is lost due to wind, evaporation, and overwatering. Poor irrigation system design, improper system installation, lack of maintenance, and improper scheduling can be contributing factors to this water loss. Examine your landscape regularly to make sure your plants are being watered sufficiently, that sprinklers are not spraying towards sidewalks and walls, and that there are no leaks. Water waste can be reduced by properly scheduling your irrigation. Since your irrigation schedule dictates your water use, one way to reduce water use is to consider replacing your existing timer-based controllers with demand-based controllers. Weather-based irrigation controllers adjust your irrigation schedule based on local weather conditions. They can be connected to peripheral devices such as soil moisture sensors and rain sensors that cancel the irrigation cycle when it isn't needed. Wind and freeze sensors will also override scheduled waterings if weather conditions aren't right. Most people now have access to a smartphone, and many new irrigation controllers now have the ability to connect to your phone via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. With this capability, you can customize your irrigation schedule with more convenience. If you're out around town and it rains unexpectedly, you can cancel your irrigation right from your phone, saving you water and money. Although you can design, install, and repair an irrigation system so that it is optimized for water efficiency, the end driver of your water use is your irrigation schedule. Irrigation schedules should be updated monthly to account for changing weather conditions. Your landscape will need less water in spring and fall months than in the high peak of summer. If you don't have a controller that adjusts the schedule for you, you'll want to make sure you do it yourself. Talk to your local utility company or extension service. They can inform you on the best management of irrigation scheduling for your area. Irrigation zones should be scheduled individually based on each zone's watering needs. Consider exposure to sun, wind, plant type, soil type, and your sprinkler type when determining the irrigation schedule for each zone. And if you see any pooling or puddling on your landscape, check for a leak in your irrigation system. In September 2017, WaterSense released its final specification for spray sprinkler bodies with integral pressure regulation, which are now eligible for the WaterSense label. These sprinkler bodies maintain a constant pressure at the sprinkler nozzle throughout the range of incoming pressures. Maintaining a constant pressure is important because it will avoid misting and overspray, which wastes water. Currently, WaterSense is working on a specification for soil moisture sensors. Consider micro-irrigation for your trees, shrubs, or flower gardens. Micro-irrigation is an efficient way to save water in areas of the landscape that may not need sprinkler irrigation or in regions where outdoor water use is limited. Here are some savings you may see by replacing your system hardware. A properly installed WaterSense labeled weather-based irrigation controller can reduce your irrigation water use by 15%. Water-efficient sprinkler heads can reduce water use by as much as 30% compared to standard pop-up sprinklers. using drip irrigation on trees, shrubs, and plant beds can use 50% less water than conventional sprinkler systems. Remember that if you replace components of your irrigation system, you should adjust your irrigation schedule for that zone to account for the changes. Now we will turn to our featured speaker today, Charles Swanson of the Texas A&M AgriLife program.
Thank you and good afternoon. Like I said, my name is Charles Swanson. I'm an extension specialist for landscape irrigation with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And today I'd like to tell you about our Water My Yard program that we've developed to help communicate to utility customers how much they need to water or if they need to water at all. Next slide, please. So some background to the reality of landscape irrigation. What we see here in our state is that landscape irrigation can account for up to 50% of a municipality's water use during the summer months. And research, extension, demonstration projects have shown that we can decrease our water usage by 20 to 30% if we implement efficient irrigation scheduling practices. Also, we know that majority of our urban landscapes are irrigating turf grass landscapes. Next, please. So, why do we develop this program? We developed this program to simplify the science of irrigation scheduling for a homeowner who may not have a lot of detailed knowledge or background in irrigation management. We had lots of programs here in the state where water recommendations would be provided to homeowners in terms of inches of irrigation needed in their yard per week. However, translating how many inches of water you need to putting minutes into an irrigation controller can be a little difficult, considering that lots of our sprinklers and other applicators have varying precipitation rates. We know that spray sprinklers have a higher precipitation rate than rotors and multi-streams, and then we can have a wide range of precip rates depending on how a drip irrigation system is designed. Next slide, please. And so here's some examples, in particular the Texas ET network, where a user can go online and sign up for email watering recommendations, where if they're told how many inches of water their landscape needs over the previous 7 days. Next slide, please. So some background into how we came up with the Water My Yard program. This was actually jointly done in the beginning in development with the North Texas Municipal Water District, trying to develop this simplified program to where we could educate homeowners on how many minutes of irrigation they need versus telling them how many inches of water they need. So working with the North Texas Municipal Water District, we released our first version of this program back in May of 2013 to provide these water recommendations in minutes, but at the same time simplify it and have some control over how we manage these watering recommendations when we have water restrictions in play as well. Next slide, please. So some background and development of the program. Like I said, we started with the North Texas Municipal Water District in 2013. After our first year, we ended up updating the program after a lot of end user experiences. We were able to quantify some challenges they had. So we made some updates, and then shortly after, we saw expansion of the program to other cities in Texas. And so in particular, in 2014, the city of Irving joined our program. We also added the Bryan College Station area, which is where Texas A&M is, to the program. June of 2014, that new version 2 was released. In June of 15, we expanded our coverage to the service area of the Lower Colorado River Authority, which is the greater Austin area. July of 2015, the Upper Trinity Regional Water District joined the program, which is located northeast of Fort Worth. Next slide, please. April 16, the Dallas County Park Cities MUD, which services University Park and Highland Park joined. July 2016, the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District and the Fort Bend Subsidence District joined the program. October 2016, the city of San Angelo. Summer of 2017, we saw expansion within the Lower Colorado River Authority to add additional weather stations to increase our coverage and accuracy of water recommendations. And then recently, we've had expansion in the Fort Bend Subsidence District by collaborating with the North Fort Bend Water Authority to add an additional weather station in that area as well. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to take you through the website or the program, how it works, and then I'll provide some results and impacts of the program we've been able to quantify to date. So this is the Water My Yard program website. Our website is watermyyard.org. Your address, your city, or your zip code. The reason for this is because in Texas we have no state-funded ET network, so all of our city sponsors invest in the program by purchasing and installing ET weather stations within their service area so that we have localized and reliable ET data in rainfall as well for their customers. So you begin by entering your address, and we check to verify that you do reside within a sponsored area where we have data. Next slide, please. And then we come to an important question. And so one of the challenges with developing the program, or why we had to develop the program, was because we were trying to get away from providing recommendations in terms of how many inches of water does your landscape need versus how many minutes a week should you run your irrigation system. So we have to know what your sprinkler precipitation rate is. And so if you know your sprinkler's precipitation rate, you can enter it here. However, most people probably don't know their sprinkler's precipitation rate. So they have the option to select, I do not know my precip rate. Next slide, please. So we have an intuitive online tool here to where we make it very simple for the user to determine what is their precipitation rate. So we have here, the homeowner or the end user can just select, I have this type of sprinkler, whether it be a multi-stream rotor, a single stream rotor, fixed spray heads, drip irrigation, or a new option we added this past summer is a hosed-in sprinkler option, primarily oscillating sprinklers for those that don't have a permanent irrigation system at their residence. So the end user would then select which type of sprinkler they're using to irrigate their yard. Next slide, please. And so to help us fine-tune their precip rate, we ask a few questions. From these drop-down menus, the user can select how far apart their sprinklers are spaced and if they know the manufacturer of their sprinkler. This allows us to reference manufacturer's performance data to estimate what their sprinkler's precipitation rate is. Within each option here for sprinkler spacing and manufacturer, there's an I don't know option. If a homeowner doesn't know one of these criteria of their sprinklers, they can select I don't know. And next slide, please. And we'll have a disclaimer come up that notifies them that if you don't know your information about your sprinkler system, the accuracy of our that could be affected of our watering recommendation. So we provide some information to the user to either go and inspect their system, to determine who their manufacturer is and measure their sprinkler spacing, or we provide documentation and resources to that user where they can go out and actually measure their real-time precipitation rate. Next slide, please. And so here's a simple fact sheet we have here for using a catch can that we produce. And so educate the homeowner on how to do a catch can test and actually measure what their sprinkler's precipitation rate is so they can enter in their precip rate and be working with their real precip rate versus an estimated precip rate obtained using manufacturer specification data. Next slide, please. And so once they've either entered their precipitation rate or they've selected their sprinkler type and criteria, you then get a watering recommendation. Excuse me. And so you can see here in this instance, the homeowner got a water recommendation of no watering, no 0 inches of water is needed, so no watering is required. The homeowner can go to the website every week and enter in their criteria to determine if they need to water, or what they can do is create an account to where they can begin receiving automated messages every week with this type of watering recommendation. Next slide, please. So here's an example of going through the initial setup, and a water requirement is needed, or watering recommendation is produced. So in this case, 0.56 inches of water is needed, and based on the criteria the user entered, they would have to run their irrigation for 66 minutes per day. And again, they would like to receive this automated, they can then click the button to receive automated watering recommendations and create an account. Next slide, please. And so here's an example of an email stating the same information as on the website. This week, no watering was needed because there is an effective amount of rainfall that was received. And so the homeowner can see on here, no watering needed because rainfall was occurred. We also educate the homeowner of any watering restrictions that are occurring within their service area. And so, for instance, on this email here, the end user is notified that they are in stage 3 water restrictions, which means 1 watering every 7 days if needed. And luckily this week, no watering was needed. Next slide, please. And here's an example of when watering is needed. There's no watering restriction at this time, but it says 2 watering days every 7 days is allowed as needed. In this case, 0.56 inches of water is needed, or 1 watering day for 60 minutes total per day. Next slide, please. So now I'll go through some advanced features of the software that help end users maximize their benefits from the Water My Yard program. Next slide, please. And so we go through the process at the very beginning, describing your irrigation system for your one particular zone. However, many homeowners often have more than one sprinkler zone. You may have spray heads in the front yard and rotor heads in the backyard, or some combination of using hosed-in sprinklers with drip irrigation in your other parts of your landscape. So once the homeowner goes through and creates their initial account, they can come in and add additional zones. And what's also great is we allow the homeowner to add additional properties to their account as well, or additional irrigation controllers. So if a homeowner or even a landscape contractor is managing multiple sites, he can create an account to receive water recommendations for multiple zones or multiple controllers in the service area. Next slide, please. By default, the homeowner can gets an email water recommendation every Monday, but the homeowner can customize that based on what their allowed watering day is. So they can go into their settings and select which day of the week they would like to receive their watering recommendation. An advanced feature also is that in addition to receiving an email, you can sign up for a text message notification. So instead of it, you can do email and text, or email or text message. All options are allowed. Next slide, please. And so here's just an example of receiving a text message notification where it says that the user signed up, and for their location, their backyard watering is 26 minutes, or for their sprays, it is 24 minutes. And so they can receive a text message on their allowed watering days, so they know how many minutes of irrigation is needed for their landscape. Next slide, please. And so here's just another slide showing that we can have multiple controllers per account receiving that email. And so earlier slides showed the account settings on the website, and this is what the email would look like if you have multiple controllers and multiple zones on your account. Next slide, please. So now I'll go through some background and how we calculate these water recommendations. Next slide, please. so we calculate our watering recommendations based on a 7-day water balance, which is the same approach that we use in our Texas ET network watering recommendations. The 7-day previous reference evapotranspiration, we multiply that times the crop coefficient or plant coefficient we use for turf grass in Texas, which in this case is 0.6, and then we implement an adjustment or an allowable stress factor. And so if we are just managing normal quality turf grass for our urban landscapes, we use a factor of 0.6. However, some cities or utilities have the requirement to reduce water usage at certain drought stages. So we can implement a drought factor here to reduce our water usage by an additional 10% during those periods of water restrictions. And then we subtract out effective rainfall as measured by the local weather station. Next slide, please. Also, in the background of the program, we have landscape criteria defined per service area. So for the most part, the program is focused on water recommendations for warm season turf grass varieties. And for most service areas, based on on-site data collected through auditing programs, we assume the turf grass has a 4-inch deep root zone and that the most service areas have clay soils. And this is customizable per service area based on available data. So what's good about having this built into the background of the program is we don't have to ask the homeowner these additional questions and make setup a little shorter and simpler. But we also control how much water is available for producing our watering recommendations. So if you know your basic soil-water plant relationships, you may recall that a 4-inch deep root zone in a clay soil only has an available water holding capacity of about 0.67 inches. So we're able to control watering to where we never produce a watering recommendation that produces more, that asks the homeowner to irrigate more than 0.67 inches or what's allowed to be held in the root zone. And that comes in very handy, or it's very important during times of watering restrictions, so we avoid overwatering during those periods where we don't have many days available to irrigate. Next slide, please. So we can limit it to that watering recommendations to that 0.67 inches per day, and this is very important, like I said, because during our drought periods a few years ago, we had a lot of utilities that implemented severe watering restrictions where homeowners were only allowed to water 1 day a week, or during, in one's case, one utility enacted 1 irrigation day every 14 days. So the homeowner could only irrigate their yard 1 day every other week. So having that limitation as far as how much water we can hold in the soil was very important during those times of producing those watering recommendations. Next slide, please. So now I'll go through briefly and describe or demonstrate some impacts and results of the program, highlighting those results in particular from the North Texas region. Next slide, please. So starting out in our first year of the program in 2013 within the Wiley, Texas service region. Next, please. And so what this shows is the very first year of operation of the program, 52 weeks of watering recommendations. And this graph shows that we started the program issuing watering recommendations in May. And at that time, we had 2-day-a-week watering was allowed. You can see that some weeks there was a water recommendation in terms of minutes allowed, recommended. Some weeks there was not. And then slowly the utility went into a 1-day-a-week water restriction. And then you can see in November of 2013, they went to a 1-day every other week water restriction. And so what's actually highlighted here is that we actually adjusted the water requirements as you went from the summer to the fall into the winter, to where we did not recommend any irrigation at all in the winter. And then as we came into the spring, early summer, then we started issuing watering recommendations again. So we were able to save a lot of weeks of water by notifying homeowners not to irrigate during the winter months. Next slide, please. And so if we summarize that first year of operation, there was 34 weeks of that year that we sent out notification that no watering was required. And so on the other side of that, so in 19 weeks did they have to irrigate their yard. So you see a significant potential in water savings just by notifying homeowners to turn off their controllers when watering is not needed. Next slide, please. Second year of operation. Here's another service area from the North Texas in McKinney. And so typically what we see is a normal landscape irrigation season of April through October, depending on when the warmer temperatures begin. And so in this case, during year 2, we defined our active irrigation season for landscapes to be April 28th through October 20th. Periods outside that, we would consider that winter, no watering required. So during the active period here, we can see that there was only irrigation required for 14 weeks of that period. And so that means that we did not have to water for 12 weeks. So almost 50% of that period, you see here 54% versus 46% comparable. Half the time almost, we did not have to irrigate at all during those months. Next slide, please. So to help us start quantifying potential impacts and savings of the programs, we did a survey of homeowners who were not using the program or who had not started using the program yet. And during our survey, we looked at the weekly run times for different sprinkler devices. And we can see here for spray heads, the minimum weekly run time that we found on controllers was 20 minutes per week, and the maximum weekly run time was 75 minutes per week, with an average weekly run time of 37 minutes per week. And these end users said they did not change their schedule throughout the year. So these were fixed schedules on their controllers, not following any watering recommendations. And for rotor zones, the minimum run time per week we observed in the controller survey was 20 minutes per week, with a maximum weekly run time of 135 minutes per week for rotor zones. That gave us an average weekly run time of 91 minutes per zone that we would use as a comparison to future watering recommendations. Next slide, please. And so this summarizes the potential water savings in 2014 for the North Texas service area. During this period, we had about 1,500 users signed up getting weekly watering recommendations. And so the first table there, table 1A, summarizes the potential water savings in gallons. And the way we estimated that was the critical flow through a 5-inch meter, which is typically 12 gallons per minute per irrigation zone. So based on this calculation for water savings, a homeowner could expect on average 19,000 gallons of water savings just from a single rotor zone if they follow the watering recommendations. But if you look at that minimum and maximum savings, that's based on the actual raw survey data. So zero savings means that some homeowners are already doing a good job. Maximum savings means that we obviously have lots of potential to cut back on water usage based on how many minutes some homeowners are running their rotors. And then we can see the same summary below that for spray heads. And then if we look at table 1B, if we assume a water rate cost of $3.41 per 1,000 gallons, which was an average water rate at that time in the service area, we can see that during that 2014 irrigation seasonal period, that if a homeowner had followed our watering recommendations versus if they had been using a run time comparable to our survey showed, they could save $67 in water per rotor zone they had operating at their landscape. Comparable, if you look at spray zone operation, the average homeowner could save $28 a year per spray zone they were following the watering recommendation for. And if you quantify this over the 1,500 users, there's definitely lots of water savings and cost savings to be shared. Next slide, please. Here we have the performance of the program in January through November of 2015 within the Wiley service area. And so we have here the weeks going through each week's watering recommendation. And the blue lines represent when there was rainfall and no need to irrigate. And then the green bars represent when a watering runtime recommendation was produced. And so we can see here, starting out in January, most of our landscapes go dormant in the winter, so there's not much need to irrigate. But we also had plenty of rainfall during those periods to where no irrigation would have been needed those weeks. And then we can see here as we get into end of March, 1st of April, some runtime recommendations start to be produced. And then we go into the summer months, and you can see that starting in July, we had a short drought period like we typically do, where we don't get very much rainfall in July and August. And so we can see consistently week after week runtimes being produced. And then we can see how those runtimes that we're recommending decrease as we go into September and October. And then there was only 1 week that year, you can see the week of October 19th, 2015, where we did issue a runtime recommendation even though there was rainfall. So it's very rare that happens, but sometimes we do get some rain, but not all of it is enough to meet the landscape's needs. And then the end of October it rained, and then the landscape went dormant. Next slide, please. And so we can summarize that year's operation from that previous chart. And so only 16 weeks of that 42-week period that we evaluated did we have to irrigate, which means that 26 weeks of that period there was no watering needed. So we were able to save that week's watering, or save that week's irrigation amount. Next slide, please. And so just quantifying those numbers from that previous slide for 2015 versus the slide a few before that, comparing water use, if you'd followed Water My Yard recommendations versus some of the results we got from our surveys, and we see very similar impacts from that previous year. And so just to summarize here, savings per defined sprinkler zone, if a homeowner had sprinklers in their landscape and was following our recommendation versus a fixed schedule that we saw earlier, they could expect to save $72 a year in water, or roughly 13,000 gallons per zone. For the rotor zones, they could save on average about 34,000 gallons per year, or $180 of water per zone in their landscape. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to summarize the last couple of years' performance here. And this is the North Texas area. And the North Texas Municipal Watershed has installed over 14 weather stations in their area to be able to have the consistent and accurate data we need to produce these watering recommendations. And so these are all located north and east of Dallas, and some cities are fairly close to each other, and some cities are fairly far apart from each other. And so if we go to the next slide, here is a snapshot of each city's watering recommendations based on their individual weather station's performance or data collected in 2016. So I don't want to focus on one graph in particular, but what's interesting and neat to point out is that we can see here among these eight cities, none of the 8 graphs really look similar to each other. And so even within those different areas, we're seeing different watering recommendations being produced. The blue bars represent when there was rainfall, and the green bars represent when a runtime was recommended. And so we can see in particular just the differences in rainfall patterns across that part of the that utility service area have a big impact on when watering is needed and when watering is not. Next slide, please. And so if we look at a summary of those 8 cities, we can see here on average, most cities had enough rainfall to where most of the weeks no watering was required. So it's almost 50% of the time, 50-50 chance that if you had to water, if you did not have to water at all. And we can see the variability in rainfall and irrigation required throughout those different cities. Next slide, please. We compare that to 2017, the following year, 52 weeks of watering recommendations. We see similar results again, where we see different patterns of when watering is required and when watering is not needed. And so we can see variability in run times being produced by how tall the green bars are, and then how much rainfall different cities got, even though they may not have been that far from each other, by how many blue bars and how tall those blue bars are. Next slide, please. And here's that summary there for 2017. Obviously, it was a little bit of a drier year, so there was more weeks where we recommended irrigation. But some cities did get more rainfall than they needed irrigation. So you can see in particular cities like Mesquite and Rockwall, where it was either more rainfall or equal weeks of rainfall versus watering needed. Next slide, please. And so this table just basically summarizes the raw data from all those previous charts, looking at how many inches of irrigation was actually recommended per city per year, and how was that influenced by the amount of rainfall received throughout the year. And you can look at this in more detail in the copy of the presentation after this webinar. Next slide, please. So we look at this in summarizing the last 2 years over the North Texas service area: 39 weeks of watering recommendations in 2016 and 30 weeks of recommendations in 2017. During 2016, we saw variability in rainfall of almost 9.5 inches across their service area. And then our total irrigation recommended across the service area varied from 5.6 inches to upwards of 8 inches. So differences in almost 2.5 inches of water being required across those 8 cities. Compare that to 2017's performance. We saw a much greater variability in rainfall. We had more tropical storms and heavier rainfall patterns where we had some flooding in areas. So total rainfall across those 8 cities varied from 26 inches to 50 inches of rainfall. So that's a difference of 24 inches across those cities. And then the total amount of irrigation needed also varied by upwards of 3 inches, anywhere from only 5.2 inches of irrigation needed for one city versus 8.21 inches of water being recommended for the next city. Next slide, please. So we've had very good results in this program. Currently, we have just over 9,500 subscribers in the program. Most of those are located in our North Texas service area. We've been waiting to do a lot of marketing and campaigning in the Houston area for the subsides district programs. The hurricane last year delayed some activities to where we were able to promote the program, but we're gearing up for 2018 here over the next month or two. Those sponsors will be doing a lot of media campaigns to promote the program going into the summer of 2018. Next slide, please. And I think that concludes my portion of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charles. We encourage everyone to visit the Water My Yard website for more information, and look to your local utility or extension service to see if there's a similar program in your area. As you're taking time to type in your questions into the chat box, we'd like to put up a few quick poll questions. We'll have a few more slides to close out the session and ask another poll question at the end about topics for future webinars. If you can stick around for an extra 5 minutes, we'll have our Q&A after these closing slides. So first we'll put up our next poll question. Do you need a way to note your attendance of this webinar? If so, we can send an email to attendees who joined for at least 30 minutes with proof of attendance. Some of you may already be WaterSense partners, but we might be new to others. Our program depends on our partners to carry the message of water efficiency to consumers. These are the categories of partners that we have. Many of the utility and government organizations on the call today fall into our promotional partner category. Additionally, our professional certifying organizations train irrigation professionals in irrigation system design, maintenance, and auditing. I want to encourage you to become a WaterSense partner. After all, it's free, and we have a lot of material to help you communicate water efficiency. And finally, our last poll question. Hopefully, you are finding these webinars to be beneficial. We'd like your input on potential topics for future webinars. So listed here, what webinar topics are you interested in for the future? If you're interested in a webinar topic that's not listed here, please feel free to type that topic into the chat box. Thanks everybody for that. It looks like we have a lot of people looking for consumer-focused irrigation auditing, as well as incorporating green infrastructure into landscape projects. We also have a little bit for right plant, right place, and improvements of water saving features for turf grass. So we'll take those into account, and then hopefully in the upcoming webinars, we will have those as some of our future topics. And so right now we're going to go on for about another 5 minutes, if our speakers don't mind, to ask a couple of questions that we have here from the audience. If we're not able to get to your question right now, we will send our speakers an email and they will be able to respond in about another week or so.
Great. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been typing in your questions. We've had a lot come in. So Charles, get ready. First question here, for Water My Yard, was participation voluntary, and what percentage of homeowners participated?
Okay, so the question is participation voluntary?
Yes, in the Water My Yard program.
Yes, it is. The way the program works is that a city sponsors an area, and so the city or the utility purchases the weather station equipment, and we help them install that, and then we begin collecting the data, and then they pay a small support fee to us to help maintain the program, and then the city just begin a media campaign advertising the program, and so there's the only benefit is potential water savings to the homeowner by joining the program. We have some cities that have over 2,500 people involved in their program, and there was really no other incentive other than potential water savings as to why those homeowners joined the program.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, do you ever encourage folks to use multiple start times for cycle and soak?
Yes, we do. On our website, we're working on some updates to the program currently, but as of right now, we just give a daily run time. But on our website, we do give guidance on if your run times are greater than 20 minutes, for example, then we recommend multiple start times per day.
Great. Next question, is the recommended watering amount for one day over a 7-day period, or is it every day within the 7-day period?
Depends on how the email is stated, but from what the examples I had posted in my presentation, it was one watering day is how it was stated there. And most weeks, we only recommend one watering a day anyway, based on our calculations. But they would just get that email saying they only need one watering day, or it would say 2 watering days, or if under some situation, 3 watering days, and then they would follow their local watering ordinances. Many of these cities have a year-round watering restriction program where maybe they're only allowed to irrigate on Tuesdays and Fridays, or some system like that. And so they would get their watering recommendation and implement that on their allowed day to water.
Okay, so you couldn't spread that out over a number of days.
No, because what we typically recommend is you water deep and infrequently. That way we help promote deeper root zones in our landscape so that we can maximize our storage of rainfall when we do get big rainfall events, and so we maintain a healthier landscape and don't have to irrigate.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. You mentioned 3,100 users for the program. How many are estimated to adhere to the recommendations that you provide?
That was 3,100 users at that time. To date, we're just over 9,500. We are working with our sponsoring organizations to do a bit more detailed analysis, surveying their homeowners as far as how often do you actually change your schedule. But what my sponsoring is telling me is that whereas some homeowners may not change their recommendation from 20 to 25 minutes, example, per week, they are seeing lots of changes in homeowners' homeowner practices in terms of when we say no watering needed, that people are actually turning their controllers off. So we're seeing lots of benefits and potential changes in homeowners' management practices just by following the recommendation regarding it rained, you don't have to irrigate, versus are they actually changing their run times week to week.
Okay. Someone else is wondering, what is the cost of the Water My Yard program?
It varies based on the service area, and so if someone's interested in joining the program, they can send me an email, and we have an informational sheet that breaks down the various costs of the program.
Okay. Who is responsible for maintaining the weather stations that you talked about, and are they annually recalibrated?
Annually, no. These are Campbell Scientific weather stations, and most of them follow a 2-year recalibration cycle based on manufacturers' recommendations. We have a certain specification for these stations. These are agricultural scientific grade weather stations where we measure all the parameters needed to calculate the Penman-Monteith ET equation. And I've installed most of these weather stations working with the cities. And then what we also do is we offer an annual training for the cities or the utilities where they come and learn basic weather station maintenance and recalibration. And then those cities then document maintenance and recalibration on a regular basis in their service areas.
Thanks so much, Charles. So we have lots of questions that have come in, but we're already at 3:05 and we want to respect your time. So we thank you all for your questions, and we are going to send those to our speaker who can hopefully get back to some of you on those. So we just thank you all for your participation today. Thank you, Charles and Marianne, for your contributions. Very insightful, and I think we all have a lot to take away from this webinar. So thanks, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.